Welcome into another episode of Locked On Phillies, and this is the big trade deadline preview episode. Well, an overview, at least, because it's early and we don't know who's selling yet, but we'll break down some options on today's episode.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, this is Locked On Phillies. I'm your host, Connor Thomas. We talk to you live on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You may know me from some of my other work in the city of Philadelphia. I am a 3-year credentialed member of the Philadelphia Phillies Media Corps. I've been doing Philadelphia sports talk for over 5 years now on 97.5 The Fanatic, and I'm in my third year as the host of Locked On Phillies. So thank you for checking us out. You think I would have learned to talk with that type of resume. Please make sure you're rating, reviewing wherever you consume your podcast, subscribing to the YouTube. If you're watching us in the YouTube forum and you have not yet subscribed to the Locked On Phillies YouTube channel, it costs you nothing, gets you notifications when new episodes are posted, and it really helps us out. So I appreciate that. Today's episode is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah. The right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your rivals. So check out Booking.com for your stay today. Love Booking.com and love what we've got in store for you on today's episode, because this is the final off day between the Phillies' start of the second half and them enjoying the All-Star break. They're off tonight. I'm recording this on Thursday, and then Friday night they'll be in Pittsburgh taking on the Pirates. Tomorrow's episode, we're going to talk second half. We're going to talk that series. We're going to look at the schedule for the rest of July, which does get a little bit tougher. But let's get down to the nuts and bolts of today's episode, which is evaluating the available potential trade market pieces that the Phillies should have their eye on. When I look at this and I see some of the names that the Philadelphia Phillies could be interested in, they vary significantly in both spots they could look to add, but they break down into two categories. The Phillies are looking to add in the outfield, and the Phillies are looking to add in the bullpen. Every great team looks to add in the bullpen, and that's a little bit less sexy, right? So let's start with the outfielders and talk about the guys that the Phillies have been rumored to be interested in and the level of potential interest they could show, the cost, all of this. This will be a general overview. I will take a deeper dive into these players as we get closer to the trade deadline. There's more conversation than what I'm going to be able to fit in here, but just giving you an idea of my general thoughts on these players to start. The first guy in the outfield, you knew exactly who I was going to talk about first, didn't you? Everybody say it all at once. Luis Robert Jr. of the Chicago White Sox. Yeah, I mean, he seems the most likely to be moved because the White Sox are flat out terrible. He has years of team control. He is a really, really good player. That is why a lot of people look at Luis Robert as the crown jewel of the outfield market at the trade deadline this year. He's only 26 years old. His rookie status, I mean, he exceeded that in 2020, but guess what? He signed through 2025, and you got a 2026 and 2027 team option. So there's a chance that you could have this guy locked down through 2027 if you choose to do so just by trading for him. That does mean the price is going to be a little bit higher. So what makes him so intriguing? Well, he's a one-time All-Star. He's a Gold Glove winner in the outfield. He has won a Silver Slugger. His career numbers, he's a .275 career hitter with 85 home runs and 1,500 just so about at bats, 430 hits. And this year, he's doing okay. He hasn't had his best year average-wise, but a lot of folks in baseball averages have dropped. Right now, what he's doing for the Chicago White Sox, he was an All-Star last year, by the way. He's only batting .236, but he's got 11 home runs, 23 RBIs, 11 stolen bases. He's missed a couple of games. He's only played in 43 games. The question for him is health, right? He's only played over 100 games once in his career, and it was last year. He got close in 2022 with 98, and 2020 was obviously the COVID year. But if you're going to move a bunch of prospects for this guy, because it's going to take multiple top prospects to get Luis Robert out of the White Sox organization, I don't see the Philadelphia Phillies doing that for a guy that they can't be sure is going to be healthy. My guess is Luis Robert is going to be something that a drastic move team has to do. Someone like the Braves, who are 8.5 games back in their division, a team like that, or a team on the fringe of competing. They're going to overpay for a player they probably shouldn't in Luis Robert because he's a young, controllable talent that is talented, but is not the most reliable when you look at it that way. So Luis Robert, I don't know that he's a fit in Philadelphia, but he's a great player. I will not be upset if the Phillies trade for him, depending on what they give up. If you have to move Aiden Miller or Andrew Painter, guys like that, Crawford, I would get a little bit nervous. This is kind of like the Goldilocks type of segment, right? Because there's three guys that are realistic to look at for the Philadelphia Phillies at this moment in time. There should be four, but I guess we'll flip in the Cody Bellinger conversation right now. Cody Bellinger probably should get moved by the Cubs based on where they're at in the standings, but everything's really tight in the National League, so the Cubs are still deciding if they're selling. And Cody Bellinger has a fracture of his finger. He was placed on the 10-day injured list, dealing with that. It seems less and less likely by the day that they're going to be able to move him due to that finger issue. You don't want to trade for a player that's injured and you don't know when you're getting them back, or you don't know what they're going to be when they get back. Healthy assets at the trade deadline are very important for selling teams. Right now, Cody Bellinger is not a healthy asset, so that conversation is dead on arrival until we see him play baseball again. Now, if you do get him back in Chicago before the trade deadline, you may be able to get him much cheaper than what he would have originally been priced because of the concerns about his health. But I don't really want the Phillies trading for a guy that has health concerns. I'm not interested in that, and that's why Luis Robert is kind of a no-go for the price, and that's why Cody Bellinger is off a lot of teams' radar. But that was the, I guess, too steep of a price. Then there's the not really going to get me as excited, but let's first go to right in the middle. You saw him over the final weekend of the first half of the season. Brent Rooker with the Oakland Athletics is another very interesting name in the outfield. Now, he's been doing a lot of designated hitting. So where the drawback is with Brent Rooker is I don't know what you're truly getting in the outfield. He doesn't have a gold glove to his name like Luis Robert does. He is a one-time All-Star, which, of course, you saw him do last year. And Luis Robert also last year. There have been a lot of first-time All-Stars lately. We didn't really talk about that when reviewing the All-Star game, but Alec Boehm was one of them with the Philadelphia Phillies. Matt Strahm, Jeff Hoffman, Christopher Sanchez, they were all one. Bottom line is, Brent Rooker is a very good baseball player, and if you didn't see it in that series against the Oakland Athletics at Citizens Bank Park, I don't know what you've been watching. He hit multiple 450-plus foot home runs in the same game. Now, it was a game where he gave up 8 home runs and a position player pitched, but he's got pop. He can defend a little bit. He's got great average, too. Like, I know he's only batting .249 for his career, but this year, batting .291 with 21 home runs, 88 hits and 302 at-bats, a 3.1 WAR if WAR is your type of thing, and he's just getting the job done. He doesn't really strike out all that much. I mean, he does. He's got 112 strikeouts so far on the year to 36 walks. So if there's a point that's a weak spot, he could strike out. But you get a right-handed bat batting nearly 300 with pop that you can place in the outfield. Sure. I don't know that Brent Rooker is a center fielder as part of the issue. And I don't know that Oakland will look at him and say, okay, he's 29, but you have another year that he's taken care of. He's arbitration eligible in 2025, so you can get another year of team control. He's not a free agent actually until 2028, but he'd be able to market himself a little bit differently in arbitration after those years. Like, Brent Rooker is a guy that you could get under team control for a long time, but is his ceiling as high as it looks right now? And because of that, will the Athletics ask for a lot of money? Well, not a lot of money, a lot of prospect capital. You know what I mean. Brent Rooker would be my favorite because I think he's not as expensive as Luis Robert, but he's more productive than this next guy who we're going to talk about, or at least consistently more productive than this next guy we're going to talk about. The third and final outfielder we'll highlight in today's episode is another one-time All-Star. He's in division. You know him from his flashy play. We're talking about Jazz Chisholm Jr. And Jazz is only 26 years old. So there's a lot of good time left for Jazz Chisholm. He's arbitration eligible in 2025. He's only a free agent in 2027, so another guy that you'd get under team control. The numbers don't look as great this year. In 2024, he's batting .249 with 12 homers, 88 hits, and 354 at-bats. He's a career .246 hitter, so he's about on par with what he's been doing over the course of his career. But you do know he's an incredibly athletic outfielder, switched to outfield, so there are some concerns about the long-term viability out there in center, where he currently plays for the Marlins. He played second, he played shortstop. They moved him to center to make sure he fits with the team. He wasn't great defensively at shortstop or second base like they thought he could be. Was an all-star in 2022. I like Jazz Chisholm's game. I don't see Jazz Chisholm as a major, like, difference maker, but maybe that's unfair considering how unproductive the Phillies outfield has been. That would be a guy where I'd say, yeah, he's the cheapest of these three options, but he's probably the least consistent of these three options, or least productive. Brent Rooker is probably nicely right in the middle. He won't be overly expensive, but he'll be somewhat productive. And Luis Robert will be incredibly productive when he's healthy. He is the most talented of those three players. I firmly believe that, but it'll be very expensive. He's got injury concerns, pros and cons of each of these guys. So I'd already told you, but I'll tell you again, my favorite would be Brent Rooker. I would love to see that guy come to Philadelphia. You're going to probably need, excuse me, bless me, thank me. There's going to be a need for another outfielder as well with the release of Whit Merrifield. Like, you're going to have to add to the bench. It's not just a starter. So maybe we'll dive deeper into the additional players available. That gets kind of weedy because could be a billion corner outfielders around baseball that either start or have come off the bench this year that the Phillies could be interested in acquiring. But those are the big names, and my favorite is Brent Rooker. Coming up next, we're going to look at some relievers that the Philadelphia Phillies could be interested in. And there are some names that you might recognize. There are some names you might not recognize. And there's one guy that stands out above the pack of the realistic options. And then the final segment is devoted to one guy as well, because I need to give Mason Miller some time. But that comes up later. Coming up next, we'll talk about the human relievers that the Philadelphia Phillies could acquire ahead of the deadline. First, though, let's talk about eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience is the formula for winning championships. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, like superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. You might be into speed, you might be into power, you might be into style. eBay Motors has you covered either way. They've got over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the price you want, it's super easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply. eBay Motors Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. I also want to tell you about our friends over at Game Time. They're the absolute best. And if you need tickets to a baseball game or really any event, you got to check out Game Time. They're an authorized ticket marketplace in Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. They got killer last-minute deals too, folks. Like all-in prices you've got. I mean, that's a beautiful thing. So you don't get to the end and it's like, yeah, your $20 tickets have $100 in fees. No, they'll show you that up front. They'll also show you views from your seat so that when you find your perfect price, you know you've got the perfect view that you're paying for. And their lowest price guarantee, the Game Time guarantee, means that if you find another seat ticket in the same row and section for less, they'll give you 110% of the difference. Not just 100%, not just, no, your money back. No, 110%. They'll pay you to do that. You could make a living doing that if it actually existed. But Game Time has the best tickets anywhere. They take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. They got a bunch of different other deals that you can check out in the app. And it's not just baseball, right? Football training camp starting soon. Preseason's right around the corner. Football season, you can get it. Basketball, hockey, the major North American sports. I mean, theater, comedy, concerts. It doesn't have to be sports. Anything you need a ticket for, Game Time has got you, and plus they'll help you out. Listen to this. You download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB. You'll just get $20 off your first purchase just for listening to Locked On Phillies. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONMLB. You'll get $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today because they got last-minute tickets and the lowest price guaranteed. All right, let's take a look at some of these relievers because relievers are tricky, right? It's somewhat of a blind spot, I think, for a lot of baseball fans because you may not see them in a certain series. They don't throw every day. It's very rare that you have a reliever who becomes a household name unless they're a closer who throws like 103, 104 miles an hour, like an Aroldis Chapman or, oh, hey, a guy Mason Miller, who we're going to talk about in the final segment of today's episode. But a lot of these guys are names they'll be like, oh, yeah, I've heard of that guy. I didn't realize he was there. I didn't realize he was doing that. And those are the guys that you may be looking to acquire. So luckily for you, I did the work for you, and I looked up some of the names that could be moved at the trade deadline, and we're going to run through who that would be exactly. And you also have to consider with all of this is where I'll give the precursor, I guess what's it called? The disclaimer. Yeah, let's call it that. This is where I'll give the disclaimer to all of these names ahead of the trade deadline. Nobody knows who's selling or who's not yet. There are only a handful of teams that are like guaranteed to be selling, and it's like the White Sox and the Athletics and the Marlins will be selling. But it's just like outside of those real bottom feeder teams, you're not really sure who's going to be a team that has to move some of these players. And for that reason, these are all speculative trades that could change in a second. Better players could become available. These players could go off the market. So you have to take all of this with a grain of salt, considering we've still got time to the trade deadline, and we don't really have a frame of reference for whose team is going to be where. Things change quickly in baseball. 10-game win streak, you're not selling. 5-6 game losing streak when you were in contention, get rid of everybody. Tough way to handle it. So let's talk relievers, though. One of the first names that has been popping up, you look at veteran guys. We looked at this with David Robertson a couple times in the past couple of years for the Philadelphia Phillies. You think Drew Smyly. Now, the breakdown of the bullpen, you might say, do the Phillies need a lefty? Do they need a righty? Right now, their high leverage arms in the bullpen are Jeff Hoffman, righty, Orion Kirkring, righty, Matt Strahm, lefty. And I talked to you yesterday about Jose Alvarado being hugely important. He still is one of your high leverage arms. So that top four, Alvarado, by the way, of course, a lefty. You have two lefties and two righties. That means you can go either way with this. It does not restrict you to saying, okay, well, you have four high leverage righties. You could really use a lefty or vice versa. No, you can get a lefty here. You can get a righty here. Just get someone who's having a great year. And Drew Smyly has been having a solid year up there at Chicago. He won the World Series in 2021 as a member of, who won it in 2021 again? Was it the Nationals? I believe it was. But anyway, he's got a World Series under his belt, which is, yeah, hang on. I'm an idiot. I want to see who won the, oh no, the Braves won in 2020. I'm so stupid. The Nationals won it in 2019. Bottom line, he was a member of that Braves team. He has playoff experience. He's 35 years old. He's been pitching forever. The numbers this year, he's got a 3.09 ERA and about like 35 innings worth of work. So he's not overworked. He doesn't have a lot of insane numbers. I mean, he struck out 32 in 35 innings, so that's solid. The strikeout is working for Drew Smyly, but he's more of a guy that's just like, you're getting another solid bullpen arm that's been around the block before. Someone interested in Drew Smyly, he would be an underwhelming acquisition as far as bullpen pitchers go. Next, after Drew Smyly, we're looking at a situation where Paul Sewald of the Arizona Diamondbacks could be available. Now, I find it funny that Sewald would potentially be available considering the Diamondbacks were in the NLCS last year, knocked out the Phillies, went to the World Series, won the NL pennant, and did all of that as the final wildcard team. I don't see them as dying to sell, but if they do decide to sell, Paul Sewald would be an interesting guy for the Philadelphia Phillies to highlight as a target ahead of the trade deadline. I don't really see him as the world's best fit for the Philadelphia Phillies simply because, like, when I see 3.3 ERA, I know we just talked about an ERA in the threes with Drew Smyly, and I see a righty that, like, I mean, sure, does he throw hard? Yeah, like relatively compared to bullpen members of today. I mean, who really throws hard? Mason Miller is one of the only guys that I look at because everyone out of Penn's throw 95 to 100 at this point. If you don't, you're probably not in the majors. But I don't know. You look at the strikeout number, 21 and a third innings pitched. So he has less use than Drew Smyly. He has 20 strikeouts. So he's pretty much striking out a batter an inning. I do have no issue with that. So that's a good sign. And 34 years old, he's a year younger. Not that 34 and 35 feel much different. Anyone who's around that age will tell you it's a miracle that these guys are playing professional sports at that age because, man, my body hurts daily and I'm only 29. But this is a guy that you'd be getting that's finishing up his contract. He's a free agent next year, just like most of these guys are. And I don't know. Again, another move the Phillies could make, a righty this time, one that doesn't really move the needle like crazy. And this guy is the one guy outside of Mason Miller that would move the needle for me if he is indeed available, if the Phillies can make a move for him. Now, he's 29, right? And he's going to be a free agent next year. So it's not like some of those other 29-year-old position players. No, Tanner Scott, you'd be getting on a one-year deal. He would be cheap compared to the outfielders, but not cheap compared to relievers because he's been having himself an awesome year. Now, 29 years old, he's been a one-time All-Star, and he has been having himself one heck of a campaign in 2024. A 1.34 ERA, a 6.5 win-loss record, a 2.8 WAR for the Miami Marlins. And listen, he's been used a lot. That's the drawback. 40 and a third innings pitched already. 39 games, 40 and a third innings pitched. He struck out 45. His strikeout stuff is awesome. He's been really good. Throws left-handed. I love that Baseball Reference, when they put this down, still put which side a pitcher bats from. I guess you have to for Ohtani eventually when he pitches again, but the DH is taking that out of the requirement. But he was an all-star this year for the first year in his career, and he's been fully deserving. In those 40 and the third innings pitched, he's only allowed 18 hits. He's allowed 25 walks, which can be slightly concerning, but that 1.066 whip is the third best of his career. Only better time was in 2020 in a short season, and last year he had a .987. So he's really coming into his own, and that could be a guy that you could re-sign to be in the bullpen for a while. He's not in his mid-30s. He's 29. So I like Tanner Scott. He would be the most expensive option, but he is the most talented option based on the numbers so far. But all of these guys go out the window, right? That's just an overview. All of these guys go out the window if this next player is one you're willing to trade the house for. And you're going to have to, especially after what we saw in the All-Star game and last weekend at Citizens Bank Park. We're going to talk about Mason Miller coming up as we wrap up today's episode. First, though, we're going to talk about Booking.com. Booking.yeah, with summer travel heating up, especially travel for baseball games, it's time to explore those U.S. cities you always secretly wanted to learn more about. Yeah, we're talking about your rival cities. Now, in Philadelphia, in the NL East, we've got great cities to visit in division that you may not have the chance to go to because you feel like you'd be ostracized as a Phillies fan. But how cool is Atlanta? The music scene, the food scene, it's great down there. Miami, you want to party, you want to get time on the beach, there's no better place. New York, one of the great tourist destinations in the world, a huge city with a million things to do. And Washington, our nation's capital. If you care about the history of this nation and you're more of a historian, it's also close to a bunch of historical sites like Williamsburg down there, and you can go to Busch Gardens. I got to say it, I don't like the Nationals, Marlins, Braves, or Mets, but I like their cities. And the reason I know that, well, you get a chance to travel there, no problem with Booking.com. They got hotels, bed and breakfast, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more on Booking.com. You might just find your perfect stay even in your baseball rival city. So the right stay can make you a fan of any U.S. city, even your rivals. Book today on Booking.com on the site or in the Booking.com app, and they can help you find your perfect vacation, even in a city of a team that's not so perfect. Let's also talk about Prize Picks because they're America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. They're the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. You don't have to play against other players. You just play against the numbers. You pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you watch the winnings roll in. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000 in a snap, and setting a Prize Picks lineup, it's super easy. It takes like 60 seconds. You just go through the pre-projected player stats, and you say, well, I think he's going to have more hits than that. Oh, I think he's going to have more strikeouts than that. You just pick a couple of them, you win some money. If you're looking for promotions, Prize Picks has a bunch of them. They lower selected players' stat projections on Tuesdays. You can get your entry fees back if you have a losing lineup on Fridays. Prize Picks is the best. So download the Prize Picks app today. Use code LOCKEDONMLB. You'll get a first deposit match up to $100. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on Prize Picks for a deposit match up to $100. Pick more or pick less with Prize Picks. It's that easy. All right. I got to just say, man, I don't rarely have my heart stolen by trade deadline acquisitions, especially with the team this good. I've been Mr. Conservative with this Philadelphia Phillies team all year. You don't have to trade that much. You don't have to do that much. You don't need this guy. This team's already talented enough. I'm sorry, folks. But did you watch Mason Miller in the All-Star game? Did you watch Mason Miller in the series against the Philadelphia Phillies? Like, this kid could very well be prime Aroldis Chapman. Like, that could be what we're looking at with Mason Miller. And there are thoughts, just like you saw with Aroldis Chapman at points in his career, that he could eventually be converted to being a starter. Now, Chapman, I believe, started as a starter and then converted to a closer when people got worried about his arm. But that's a dude who was incredibly productive for winning teams for years and years and years, Aroldis Chapman was. And Mason Miller may be better. He's got unbelievable stuff, man. He throws 103, 104. He's got a wipeout breaking ball. I don't know how you ever hit this dude. I don't get it. And the Phillies couldn't figure him out, and no one's really figured him out. He's got a 2.27 ERA, a 1.6 WAR so far for the Oakland Athletics. It's only his second year in the majors, and he was an all-star this year, very much deserving of that feat. In 39 and 2/3 innings pitched. I need you to listen to this, right? We talked about like some of these other guys. Tanner Scott was like in 40 innings pitched, he struck out like 39 or something like that. It's right around the same number of strikeout per inning. Mason Miller has struck out 70 batters in 39 and 2/3 innings pitched. He's only walked 14. He's only given up 10 earned runs. He is unbelievable. His whip is a .857. Like, his strikeout to walk ratio is 5 even. This dude is the best reliever in baseball right now for my money. If there was a number one guy that I would not want to face with the game on the line, it would be Mason freaking Miller. And the A's are selling, and he's going to be available. And I'm this close. Like, if you're not watching on YouTube, I'm holding my fingers about a centimeter apart. I am this close to saying trade whatever necessary to make Mason Miller a Philly. The other part of this that's great, right, is you wouldn't just be trading for a one-year rental at reliever. The guy's 25 years old. He's basically the Paul Skeens of the bullpen, and he's available. And I think the Phillies would be silly not to do everything they can to figure out if there's a reasonable price they could use to trade for this guy. Now, the tough thing is, this is a less valuable spot than what a starting caliber outfielder would be. So if you're going to move some major assets for somebody, it'll probably be for an outfielder. And that sucks because I don't think the Phillies are going to want to do both and make two huge moves at the deadline and get like Luis Robert and Mason Miller or something like that. But when you look at what he's got, he's arbitration eligible in 2026, which means he's pre-arb still for next year. And he's not a free agent until 2030. You'd have him locked down for a long, long time at age 25, throwing 103, 104, getting guys out, striking out everybody. Like, he is an incredibly valuable weapon. The Philadelphia Phillies, for once in the Rob Thompson era, would have a bona fide closing pitcher that you can say, go out there and get us the ninth every single darn night. And I don't know how Mason Miller ever really looks like a bad acquisition, unless injuries become a thing. He's only pitched for a year and a half at the major league level. But unless he becomes one of these guys like he throws so hard his body can't hold up, there is no downside to acquiring Mason Miller. Like, I rarely get like this with players where it's just trade whatever necessary. But I'm so close to being there with Mason Miller. You guys watched it, right? You saw how he threw in the All-Star game against Trey Turner, almost hit him with 103, and Trey looked like he saw a ghost. You saw what he looked like closing out games against the Philadelphia Phillies. Well, one game in that series against the Athletics. Like, you understand what this team would be if you had not only to beat the Philadelphia Phillies, deal with the lineup of Bryce Harper, Trey Turner, Alec Boehm, JT Realmuto, Kyle Schwarber, Nick Castellanos, Bryson Stott, Brandon Marsh, all of these guys. Maybe you trade for Luis Robert. Best lineup in baseball. You got to deal with that. And then on top of dealing with that, they're going to play great defense behind one of the best starting rotations in baseball in the past decade. You got to deal with Wheeler one day, Nolan the next day, Suarez the day after that, Sanchez the day after that. Like, that's I don't know how you handle it to this point, but let's keep going. Then in the bullpen, you're going to get 6-7 innings of a guy who is an all-star level starter, because 3 of those guys were all-star level starters. Aaron Nola probably deserved to be one. you're going to get that done. Maybe you survive the offensive approach for the Phillies and you only allow up like 2 or 3 runs to that great lineup and you find a way to scrape 1 or 2 across. Then in the bullpen, you're going to be dealing with Matt Strahm, who's got a sub-1 ERA, Jeff Hoffman with a sub-1 ERA, Jose Alvarado, who's a crazy hard-throwing lefty that looks like the ball's coming from behind you, or Ryan Kirkring, who's going to throw 100 with a knockdown slider. And then if you're lucky enough to get to the 9th inning with even just a smidgen of a chance, this guy rolls out of the bullpen throwing 104, and it's good morning, good afternoon, good night. That sounds like a World Series winning team to me. That sounds like an impossible to beat team to me. And no baseball team's impossible to beat. But man, do I want Mason Miller in a Philadelphia Phillies uniform. And it feels good to finally say it that way because normally I kick myself for coveting a player so much that I'm willing to trade basically any prospect for him. But for Mason Miller, I might have to say that any prospect is on the table. Now, we'll take a deeper dive into that over the coming days as we draw closer to the deadline, and I'll truly evaluate who would be on the table, what it would cost. We'll figure all of that stuff out for you. But just from an overview perspective, that's the guy. If we could leave the trade deadline with one guy, I would pick him over any outfielder, any reliever, any player in baseball right now. That's all for today's episode of Locked On Phillies. Thank you so much for checking us out. Please make sure, again, you're rating, reviewing, subscribing to the YouTube, all that great stuff that really helps us out here on Locked On Phillies. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I'll talk to you tomorrow as the second half gets going. The break's over, folks, on the next episode of Locked On Phillies.